Hi, welcome to the Langsford Lectured Series in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm Shelley White, occupational therapist, and we'll be sending out a link to the webinar recording within a few days. So for those of you who couldn't join us live, there will be that. The topic is dysgraphia and occupational therapy today, and as I said, I am Shelley White. I'm an occupational therapist. I'm also a parent, and I have teacher experience too. I've taught at the college level and the high school level as well. And I feel like those are really important points to bring up because I feel like I understand all sides of this issue. I've been a therapist 22 years. I'm a mother to 5 kids, and they're at all ages in the school system right now. I have 2 in elementary, 1 in middle, and 2 in high school. So we've got some different things going on at my house too, so I feel like I understand what this looks like at home when you're struggling with kids at home. And then again, being in that teacher environment, I was able to get so much insight from teachers when I was working as a teacher, and then also just spending a lot of time eating lunches and collaborating with teachers. So I find that very valuable in my practice. What is dysgraphia? Dysgraphia is a specific learning disability that affects written expression, and it can appear as messy handwriting or difficulty with spelling. It's basically kids that struggle to get their thoughts down on paper. And I thought it would be worth explaining occupational therapy a little bit too, because I get that question a lot as a therapist, even from people who have been working with me for a while. What is OT? Well, occupational therapy is a type of therapy that helps people basically just thrive and do well their activities of daily living. So for kids, that's school. So that's a common thing that I see is people coming into my office. Probably 99% of the kids I see are coming in saying we're struggling in school. And a lot of those children are struggling with written expression. Some signs of dysgraphia I figured would be helpful to just punch out right here in the beginning. You can see things like an awkward or tight grip, difficulty with staying in and on the lines, spacing issues, spelling errors, difficulty forming letters. Kids might piece their letters together instead of making real efficient type of letters, slow, labored, or messy writing, although it's not always messy. Poor attention to margins, trouble with organizing thoughts, errors in punctuation and capitals. They tire easily. They may avoid writing altogether. It's a kid who might not even initiate a writing assignment if they're sitting within the classroom and don't have quite enough support. Basically, there's an impact on their learning. You know, I think everyone could say their handwriting is messy sometimes or they misspell things, but if it's causing daily impact and interfering with their ability to write, then that's when it might warrant occupational therapy referral. They may not be finishing their work on time. They may not have legible writing. I had a high school student referred to me a few years ago, and he was complaining because he couldn't read his own notes. So he had put off the handwriting intervention for as long as possible, but finally he was annoyed by it. Inefficiencies can be noted, as I said. Their answer quality, teachers will often say they can tell me what they want to say, but then what they put on paper is completely different. They may not start tasks without help because they may be a little bit overwhelmed by it, all the components of it, and the errors and concerns are consistent. So what do we do when occupational therapy is warranted? Well, for sure, I like to start with a standardized assessment because it gives me a baseline and it gives me something I can measure their progress with. I typically use the print tool, but before the print tool, I used sort of an outline of objective measures, and I'll go over that as well. But the print tool is put out by Handwriting Without Tears, Learning Without Tears. It's known as both interchangeably, and it's an excellent resource. If you can have the opportunity to attend any of their training, it is fantastic. And the print tool is a wonderful assessment. Observations and work samples are important too, though. I like to see the child in my office. I often can observe them in the school under normal conditions, not right now as often. I'll ask their parents to bring their backpacks and let me see what's in a workbook, because what a child produces for me, even on the print tool, is pretty rote and simple, and it might be what they will say is their best handwriting. So I want to see their worst too. I want to see when the cognitive demand is high, what does that handwriting look like? Home programming is a huge part of the intervention process, as are school accommodations and collaboration. And then of course therapeutic interventions that are going to tackle any of the underlying skill areas like fine motor, visual perception, stuff like that. So we'll start with the standardized assessment. As I said, I use the print tool, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that because that would be its own topic, and Handwriting Without Tears does a great job of presenting that, teaching people how to use it. But the standardized assessment, regardless of what you use, needs to include all the components of handwriting in order to really figure out what is going on and where to begin. So I like to look at memory and processing first of all. Can kids recall all the letters in the alphabet? Can they write them down easily? Are they struggling to get those down? Or is it coming out pretty automatically? That gives me a good idea of if they've ever mastered truly each letter on its own. And orientation is something that's important too. Are there a lot of reversals? Are they slanted? Are they straight? Are they on the line or off the line? Is going to come into visual spatial stuff too. So margins, are they paying attention to them? If you see some of their work samples and there was a space for them to write, did they regard it at all, or did they pay any attention to the area that they had? Were they able to stay within the area? And then motor planning sort of lends itself to how do I make the letters. And I included this picture here of a Handwriting Without Tears workbook because it shows where kids are supposed to start the letter and the sequence they're supposed to go into. So when you're looking at motor planning, it is a good idea to find out what is the school's curriculum. How did they teach the child to do it? Because that is going to impact how, in fact, they are doing it. So Zahner Blosser is used often. Handwriting Without Tears, I think, is the most often used curriculum in our city and state from what I see. And if you're not familiar with them, you can ask teachers for a copy of the workbook, or if you can borrow one and have a look at it so you can see. Coordination and control often kind of manifests itself with pencil pressure. Are they writing really, really hard? Are they writing barely at all, very lightly on the paper? And what's the size of their letters? Is it huge? Usually you'll see letters kind of get bigger as kids, as the demand goes up and as the letters go further on down the line. But in addition to that standardized piece that will give you some kind of baseline as to where they're functioning the first day you see them, you also do want to look at those other things. Like I said, work samples, interview the parent, interview the child, find out what is hard for you. What do you think about all of this? And sometimes they know, and sometimes they really don't know. They don't have any idea at all, except for they may say that it's just really hard, really frustrating, but I have had kids tell me they don't like the way the pencil feels, and that's really good information. So you do not want to skip interviewing the student. The report cards can be helpful, again, just as another baseline measure of where they're scoring, how are things going. Comprehensive evaluations and reports, those are typically done by licensed psychologists, and they're very useful. Obviously, they're going to have diagnoses and things like that. And if they haven't had one, and you're thinking they have dysgraphia, then it's probably a good idea to refer them for testing. Rote writing versus complex writing, I kind of spoke about that. If you're having them write something really simple so you can evaluate their abilities, you also want to look at something more complex, either in their work samples or have them write something for you. Accommodation planning is a huge part of what I do, and that is basically coming up with recommendations for things that could be helpful to them in terms of writing throughout the day, some real quick and easy tips, but also they may have some in place already, so you want to know what those are. Positioning and posture, I have some pictures here. I hope you can see them well. The first kiddo at the top is sitting up nice and tall. Desk is a little high for him, but mostly I like this picture because both of his arms are supported on the table, and he is got a great grip. Obviously, he's using both hands. One hand is holding the paper. And then the kid down here, on the other hand, is sitting. He's got a little W sit going on, and he doesn't have any support. He's trying to write sort of with his arms not supported. And those are all things you want to look at too. Some kids find it quite hard to use that non-dominant hand to hold their paper. So jumping right into interventions, the home program is probably the biggest piece of this. It's really important that kids are getting very consistent practice with whatever you're teaching them when you're trying to remediate their handwriting and help them on their journey with dysgraphia. And handwriting is a really big piece of that. If you ever were to look at a pyramid of what sort of writing skills you need to write an essay, for example, it's going to start with basic handwriting, and then the spelling and the grammar and punctuation, all that stuff kind of just layers on. So we have to start at the very bottom, which is how are they writing? How are their handwriting skills? So it's a huge part of a dysgraphia remediation program. There's extra reps that kids can do. Literally 10 minutes a day is, I think, the recommendation. 5 to 15 is the range that I recommend. If a kid is really struggling or has a really bad feeling about it, I want them to slowly build their confidence and their abilities, so I might start with 5 minutes a day. But it just allows them to practice all the things you're going to teach them, like scripts and phrases that you can cue them with and that help them remember how to make letters, as well as giving them an opportunity to practice with visual cues that they may not have in school. Repetition is key, so you want to find out, again, what is the school's curriculum and how can I review that instruction and make sure the kid is really familiar with it. Rainbow writing is one of my favorites because you can give them a writing task and then you can have them trace over it in all these pretty colors, and it makes it a little more fun for them. I get kids into colored pencils, gel pens, whatever they can get excited about, and trace the same thing over and over, gives them the repetition without having to give them a lot of papers, and also lets them see the lines underneath and how well they're doing. They can sort of evaluate where they are in the process. If you ask them to trace it 5 times, they can see, I finished in red, now it's time to do orange, stuff like that. I recommend workbooks. So if a child, say, is in kindergarten or first grade and they actually still do use a workbook for handwriting in the school, then I will recommend a duplicate copy or that the teacher sends home copies. So the child can get more repetition than just the one page that might be set aside for that letter. Create individualized worksheets. That's even better, and that's what I do often. A lot of times I will have the child start out with their simple writing of the alphabet each session, and then see which letters seem to be problematic and create worksheets based off of those. And I'll show you some of those in a little bit. And then layer on the visual cues. If you're saying it to them and they can start to track and follow what you're saying and respond to that instruction, one thing that can be helpful in a home program is to give a lot of visual cues, because we all know when we're busy, even as a parent, if we're intending to watch them the entire 10 minutes and give them feedback, which is what I train parents to do, we also know that we get distracted and we're cooking dinner and stuff like that too. So the more layers we can add in, if we zone in and out of their home program session, the kid can still really get the quality practice that we're going for. Otherwise, they can revert to old habits, and then they're going to practice writing with their old habits, which is the last thing we want. We don't want to reinforce those old habits. So scripting and language is a huge part of that. And what I mean by that is giving the child something they can kind of say over and over like a broken record when they're learning a new way to make a letter. So for example, A is a huge one where I see kids piece the letter together. They might make a ball and a stick, and that's not very efficient. It'd be quicker to just make the letter in one motion. So Handwriting Without Tears calls that a magic C letter, and so I love that cue, and a lot of the schools, like I said, use that curriculum as well. So a magic C, up and back down, might be the language I use when I'm cueing a child to make it, instead of a ball and stick, in that fluid one motion to create the letter A. So if I say that over and over, and I'll tell them so they don't just think I'm super annoying for no reason, I'll say, I'm going to say this over and over to you so you can start to hear it in your head, and then when you're making them at home, I hope you'll hear my voice saying magic C, up and back down, and that's how you make an A. So we want to use that, and there's pretty much, you can come up with something for whichever letter or number they're struggling with. 8, the number 8 is another big one where I will ask kids to start with the letter S and then finish it by going to the opposite corner. And I'll just say that over and over. Otherwise, they might end up doing some other sequences to make 8 and doing it different every time. And unless they make it the same every time, they're not going to master that sequence. So mastery is what we're going for. If you overlearn something, then no matter how nervous you are, no matter how many other cognitive layers you add to a task, it's going to come out really automatically. And I often will compare this to when you first learn to tie your shoes. You'll see a child tying their shoes with their tongue out, concentrating really, really hard. And then eventually we can tie our shoes while we're hopping around on one foot looking for our keys. And that's because we've overlearned that motor plan, that sequence of how we do things. So when we do these scripts and language cues for children, we want to tell their parents, we want to tell their educators, because then they can use it too. If they are walking by and they see a piece together A, they can say, oh, remember a magic C? Why don't you trace back over that with a magic C and see if you can remember for the rest of your paper, if you can make it with a magic C, something like that. And then the teachers can also give information back on how that's going. So we'll talk about more collaborative stuff later. But the other really important thing about language and scripting in general is that you have a positive tone. These kids are probably feeling pretty beat up and down about handwriting and writing in general if they've made their way to need intervention. So really reassuring, growth mindset kind of stuff where you're really telling them, it's okay, you're going to get it. Anytime I remind you, it's because I'm helping you. Don't ever feel like you're in trouble or that I'm on you for any other reason but to help you. And that's really important that we say that explicitly because kids don't always know that. Keep progressing. We want to reassess often. So typically I will see students once a week, maybe twice a week, if it's a case that requires a lot of intensity. Besides in the summer, I do intensives where I can see them 3 or 4 days a week for a shorter period of time. They don't have as much schoolwork competing, so it's a really great time to remediate handwriting. But on the other hand, I get a lot of students during and throughout the school year, and so I'll see them weekly, and they'll do that home program 10 minutes a day, every single day. And at that point, I'll be able to reassess, see with my objective measure, whatever I decide that is. Like I said, mine's the print tool. And I will have them write out their letters and their alphabet, and I can see which ones are still inconsistent and make my plan from there. The other thing I might do is have them do some tracing, copying, and originating their own thoughts and see how that goes. Are they able to maintain the good quality with copying? Then they're ready to copy. If not, then we'll go back to tracing and so on. So focus on consistency. We really want to see the letters they make come out in a consistent way, not a ball and stick one time and a magic C the next time. We want to see it every time that they've changed their habit. So I've attached some examples here. These are some of the individualized sheets that I've made for kiddos. You can see that I've added arrows to my letters. I've added green dots of where they should start. For letters where you lift the pencil, Handwriting Without Tears calls that a frog jump. I have numbers, and I teach them all of this, one thing at a time. Some of them will be familiar with it from when they learned it the first time around, and in that case, they'll catch on pretty quickly. Maybe I can teach them a lot of language in one day, but if it all seems kind of new to them, I might stick with one type of letter. So A is a lot like D, which is also like lowercase g, which is also like lowercase q. I might just focus on one thing one day if the language is kind of overwhelming to them or if it seems like they're having trouble to execute it. So you can practice, have them practice by making them a sheet of the letters, the very letters that are maybe difficult for them, and have them rainbow write. You can see I have some little check boxes at the top, rainbow tracing 1, 2, 3, 4. It's usually however many times I feel like the child can tolerate. If I say 3 and they're super overwhelmed by that, then we'll go with 3. But if they're going and not complaining at all and enjoying it, then I might say 10. And obviously the more repetition they get, the more expedited the progress will be. So also I wanted to point out that this is 3-lined paper, whereas that is wide ruled paper. And I will pick what is age appropriate, unless they're not able to fit in that space, then I will just pick what's appropriate for them. So that's something you can recommend also. If the whole class is using wide ruled, but the student might really benefit from 3-lined paper, you could find some, offer it to the whole class as anyone who wants to use this. If you're wanting to write a little bigger, I'm really big into normalizing support, so having the teacher offer it to everyone. Most people probably won't take you up on it, or they might do it once or twice, but it's definitely not going to hurt them, and it makes the child who could benefit the most not seem like they're standing out as much if they choose to use it. And then words. Once they're mastering letters, you can progress to words. So I'll put some of their spelling words, or if it's the letter B they're working on, then we'll think of as many words as we can think of as B in our session, and I'll have them either rewrite or trace them depending on where they are in the process. Spelling words are great practice for this. You can obtain a spelling list from teachers and write it out in your best elementary handwriting for them, and place some green dots on where to start and have them trace those spelling words. It's a great way for them to study their spelling words and gain the handwriting practice and the repetition that we're speaking of, but then also you're layering on those visual cues. So that's another great reason to individualize your sheets when you can, because you can sort of double it up so you're not simulating tasks, you're not making extra work for them, you're giving them work that will be really important to them. A child who traces his spelling words and or copies them every day is probably going to ace the spelling test on Friday, so it can be helpful. And then these little guys over here, this is an example of how you can use Play-Doh or putty in a way to really develop the intrinsic muscles of the hands, which are the muscles that we need for handwriting. It's also a great bimanual task, which means we're using both of our hands together. So using little tiny features like the seeds of a watermelon or pepperoni of a pizza, you're going to get a child who might tend to use bigger motions to manipulate their Play-Doh to have to make teeny tiny details. So the details are where it's at when you're giving some home program. And I typically will give some handwriting, some tracing and stuff like that, and then I will also give some fun play activities, coloring, Play-Doh and stuff like that. We'll keep giving you examples of those. But one more thing I wanted to point out on this slide is my little lava paper, and I don't know if you can see it super well now that we're doing Zoom for life these days, but there's a little orange squiggly line that falls below the line for letters that have a tail, like Y or lowercase p, stuff like that. And so kids that might make that really, really long and go into the next line 2 or 3 lines down on their page, or maybe they're not making it long enough, I will tell them to reach down for the lava, but don't touch it, to help them get some spatial awareness of where those tails need to be. Also, paper that doesn't have a third line, if you're wanting to use one, you can draw a dotted line and cue the child to visualize a middle, and eventually you can progress a child from 3-lined paper to 2-lined paper using that strategy. So other skill areas we want to tackle when we're talking about dysgraphia, we do really want to give them repetition with handwriting and letters and alphabet and master those things, we do. But also, as OTs, we want to make sure that they have the underlying skills they need to be able to support that handwriting progression. So fine motor is often a skill area that's impacted. Visual motor, that's are we tracking and able to follow things with our eyes. Visual perception, what are we seeing? And that impacts spatial awareness too. Attention-based skills like attention to details, really huge with handwriting because we need to notice things like, are the letters tall? Do the letters have a tail? Where do they land on the page? So the attention-based skills kind of support learning everything else. And executive functioning, this is a great age-appropriate way to develop executive functioning because kids are having to control impulses if I'm teaching them a new way and they have to stop and think before they start writing and stuff like that. And in fact, it's kind of cool to be a therapist 22 years and look back and say, I used to have anecdotal thoughts about this. I could see people's attention skills improve when I was teaching them handwriting, but now the MRI research supports that, and that's really cool. It supports writing fluency and reading fluency, and all those attention-based skills the same neural pathways are being flexed when kids are practicing handwriting. So honestly, I've had kids with maybe not a true dysgraphia work on handwriting and improving the neatness of their handwriting and spacing and stuff like that, because it does help them in a very objective, measurable, sort of simple, age-appropriate way pay attention to some of those details. So consider play as options, teachers, that target skill areas for homework, because sometimes, you know, the spelling and the handwriting and all that stuff is good, but, and I see teachers do this more and more, where they send home little games to play, or ideas, bingo card that says, you know, maybe play with Play-Doh, or draw a picture, color a picture for extra credit, something like that. But anything that gets the fine motor muscles going, especially when writing is overwhelming to a child, because it allows them to build endurance and stamina without piling on really stressful writing tasks for them. And then play. As parents, we can intentionally play with our kids. I have a little fact sheet that I give parents often that talks about intentionally playing with your child. You can do it for anything. You can do it for social skills and really try to target turn taking and things like that, but you can do it with the fine motor stuff too. So maybe they avoid the games that require them to pick up little things. So maybe you put the others away for a while and only have options that would allow them to use these 3 fingers is what we're going for. So things like Connect 4 is a great game, or checkers, the little, I think it's called Chinese checkers with all the little marbles. Operation is one of my favorites, but even Monopoly, where they have little game pieces and they're having to use money. Play-Doh, I think Cranium has a game called Sculptorades, and they have a kid's version of that, so that's really fun, and those fine little details. So if I'm making a blob for a snowman and no one can guess what it is, as the parent guiding them to, can you put any details, what is it, you know, and really help guide them to use those fingers, which they might be avoiding. So here are some examples of that. Adult coloring books, I love that these have made a huge, they're trending now and they're hugely popular. I love it, because this is a picture, I think, of a goose, but I had a whole book of these, a cat and whatever you could ask for. And the inside the picture was broken up into little shapes. So I would challenge a kid to just color 2 or 3 shapes a day if coloring overwhelmed them. And so the idea would say, how long do you think this will take us? And we would count the shapes, and it'll probably take 4 weeks to color this picture, but it's going to be wall-worthy. It's going to be so beautiful. And helping them focus on coloring inside the lines and filling all the white spaces. It seems really nitpicky, and I'll tell kids that. It sounds really nitpicky, but by doing it, you're going to be paying attention to these little details and really working on coordination and motor control. So in visual, all the visual stuff. So tiny parts coloring is what I call it, and it's great. And I tell you, I walk in a classroom and kids ask me for coloring sheets, even kids that I didn't used to get to pick up a pencil when I first started seeing them. So it's really great. I do think kids enjoy it. Here in the middle are some letters that I brought in. I think they were a magnet set, and I had the child spread them all out in the order of the alphabet. That can be really good for those children that are struggling with memory and recall and stuff like that. Lining them up and then going back and let's sing or say the alphabet while we're pointing to it. This is visual motor skill stuff and processing. It's a lot of stuff. But what I love about it is I often discover that once we get to LMNOP, we may not know what L, M, N, or O, or P is. I've had kids call L ETA and M meta and ETA meta P. Wait, what are all these other letters in here? So it's good to help you find out, are there any they may really, truly not know, they don't know yet. And I used to think that was so wild. The first one I ever saw in my level 2 field work long time ago, but I see it quite often actually, that they get kind of lost in that LMNOP range. So it's helpful, and it's helpful for them to put them together. I also can, Halloween's really fun. I have the witch fingers and have them point to it with the little witch finger, or you can find really fun things at the dollar store. Make it fun. Kids love to play, and we want them to have as much fun as possible while they're doing this. But bringing in fun art projects. This was a little painting project. This was an older child, a teenager, that was remediating their handwriting, and just working on fine lines. I think we did it jointly. I did some and they did some. And then here's some Play-Doh stuff. This was actually what I did at my house with my kids. And then I took a picture and sent it ahead before one of my virtual sessions. And I do want to spend some time speaking to that as well, because I know a lot of us are doing remote stuff right now. And it is of note that all of these things can be done remotely. I might just need to send a note to parents out of these things, what do you have? Or send them that sheet of intentional play or fine motor, visual motor play activities, and have them highlight it and send it back to me which things they have. That way each week I can pull it out and say, hey, why don't you go grab this game or that game, the things we have in common. So it can make it really fun, and they do enjoy it. They'll run around and get all their stuff and show it to me, and then I just have to get the Play-Doh to get put away when it's time to write. But having the parents as cameraman has been a really huge help in getting parents super involved. My most involved parents even said when we made the transition that this was so helpful for them to be in the whole session, the whole time, and see everything and hear everything I said, so that when they were doing their home program throughout the week, they really had all that whole experience of the entire session to help give feedback to their child. So the remote sessions are going really well, and I wondered with handwriting, because to me it seems like such a hands-on skill, but you can do it, and even the evaluation you can do, which I'll come back to that in a minute. More stuff to do. I like to do step-by-step drawings with kids because it works on visual spatial skills. There's a ton of them on the internet, but also I just typically do them myself. Where I'll say, this was a side-by-side, but I've done these all summer long in remote sessions where I have kids, okay, start out by drawing a big circle, and I'll have it on my, showing my paper and not me, and I'll say about this big, see my paper's this big, and I made my circle about 1/3 of the page, and depending on how much cues they need, I can just layer those on. If they make a huge circle, then maybe we'll just make the cat's face, and that's okay too. But then we go, let's make an upside down triangle. Let's go above the triangle and make 2 eyes. We're going to make 2 round circles. And step by step, kids that really can't draw will turn out really beautiful drawings, and they like it, increases their confidence. But we're working on visual motor, visual spatial, fine motor. We're working on everything. And I'll cue them to put their hands down, to hold their paper, and offer that bimanual support, which is sometimes really tricky for kids. And they end up really liking drawing. I've worked with kids that, no, I don't really like to draw or color, and then the first thing they ask me when they see me is, can we do that, please? So also the language, above, below, bottom, top, all those things are really good. So when you have a child who's struggling with that, and they can see what you're saying while you're saying it, just gives them a lot of supported and reinforced practice with visual spatial cueing, which you're going to need in handwriting. So now when I say, that goes at the top, or this goes at the bottom, or below, or whatever. We've had some practice with that. And that can even vary. We think of little kids needing those cues, but sometimes it's older kids too. Puzzles are great, and this is a pretty big one. It was 1,000 pieces, but when I worked in a clinic years ago in a day program, we always had a puzzle out, and people would just pick little parts and pieces of it and work on them and build their confidence with doing a puzzle. Abstract drawings are great, especially for kids that tend to have perfectionistic qualities or OCD type stuff. I've worked with kids when they do drawings, mine doesn't look like yours and this and that. So abstract drawing is a great option for stuff like that, because you can use those same big, little, above, below, copy me, stay with me, we're working on this thing together. I did do this drawing with a child virtually. He's a middle schooler, and he sent this to me after a week. So this was 1 week of coloring. And then once they draw it in pencil, they go back over and trace it in black, which again, staying on those lines, great visual motor work. So any chance we get to just flex those skills, it doesn't always have to be handwriting and handwriting curriculum, although that repetition is so important. Doing the other stuff is really important too, because it builds the skills in sometimes a less frustrating way, and kids can tolerate it for longer too, which improves their stamina. This was a pinch pot made out of Play-Doh, and the little details, that's the whole reason we did it. The pinch pot was more, it does get into some intrinsic stuff, but the beginning part, kids are using bigger muscles, and then to make the little smile and eyes, and then they can leave it out to dry. And that was made over virtual sessions. Anytime I had a kid ask me if we could make these things out of popsicle sticks that he saw a YouTube video. So my homework for the week was to figure out what he was talking about, and came back the next week and we made the contraption. It was really hard visual work, and it was really hard fine motor work, but we did it. And color by number, sidewalk chalk in the summer was really fun. I'd have the kids take their handwriting outside and try to get some extra practice out there. And you can make it super fun. It can be pictures and letters, anything at all to get them moving and writing and drawing and coloring, all those things. So this is a great example of grip remediation. A lot of people will ask me, do we remediate a grip? And especially when they're older, it can be sort of tricky, because if you tear down someone's grip, it's going to make the quality of their writing deteriorate a little in the beginning. If a child holds a pencil or a pen like this, and then we want them to switch to a tripod, they'll say it's harder and their writing isn't as neat. And so a lot of times I'll just kind of let them make that decision for themselves when they're older, because we need their buy-in anyway. But I'll also keep giving them things that will help them build up those muscles that will just allow it to hopefully naturally progress to that point, because grips are fluid. You know, once a kid establishes one, it might be their habitual grasp. But especially in the early years, if you can just keep progressing their grip as they get more comfortable with it, they'll use the tripod more and more. At least that's been my experience. So one of my little hacks, life hacks, is to take whatever writing utensil they have and give them a little teeny tiny short one. This particular crayon was one of those crayons that you stack up and piece together almost like Legos, but instead of using them together, I tear them all apart and give the child one color at a time. And without any cueing at all, the difference is from this to this. There's not as many options on a really short pencil or crayon or whatever. So the good thing is you can find these little cute things everywhere you go, but also you can just break crayons into bits. I also love to make crayons at home. We just peel them all up and put them in molds and make little squares and shapes. You can find them at hobby stores, and it's as simple as melting the crayons in the microwave. I don't have a ton of time for these types of crafts, but they're great because they end up being little objects that kids sort of have to manipulate with less fingers than if they have a big pencil to spread out onto with all their fingers. And so the collaboration piece is huge. We've talked about home program. We've talked about underlying skills interventions, all those fine motor, visual motor, underlying skill activities you can do to build the skill areas. Collaboration is another huge piece because we want to all work together in all of the child's environments. So if I am working with a child and I can tell their teacher, we're really focusing on this letter this week, so anytime you see this letter, you might pay extra attention to it. Or we're really working this week on their grip, so please offer them short pencils. And I have a school here in town that when I came back in the school after working there a couple of weeks with one child, then two, then a few, and all the tables had little jars with little tiny pencils in it, and I just loved it because it was per my recommendation to normalize it. And all the kids, I want a little pencil, I want a little pencil, and it wasn't hurting anybody, right? And it was great. And a lot of kids were getting their grips changed just automatically by choosing that smaller pencil. And there are other things you can do too. That would be a whole nother webinar, I think. But switching, having that conversation with the teacher so they could switch that up for the child was a really big deal, because then that child felt very comfortable choosing it as an accommodation, and it really truly helped their grip. Another thing you can do when you're collaborating is get information and materials from the teacher. So if they write a letter every Friday in one of the classrooms I'm in, then they share that template with me, and then I can send it home with the child. I can have it next to me when I'm working with the child, and maybe we'll work on writing their letter in advance, getting a little jump on it. And asking the teachers, of course, if that's okay, and they're usually very happy for me to do that with a child. So you can see how many visual cues that excellent letter writing template has for a child to refer to. But then also, if that's on their whiteboard, I might bring in take a picture and bring in a smaller picture for them to refer to side by side, or ask the teacher if they can do that, so that now the child doesn't have to keep looking up at the board, because that's kind of hard if they're already overwhelmed and struggling with a task. They can have it right next to them. And then we can sometimes come up with checklists together. This kiddo down here in the corner, you can see little tabs, hopefully in their workbook, and those said things like magic CAs, right on the line, stuff like that, whatever the kid is working on. And then this bigger checklist too was one that, again, normalized. Every writing station in the classroom had one on it for the kids I was working with, but also the teacher just said, hey guys, I'm putting out this writing checklist so that everyone can look at it when they write. And it had some things about the specific way they made letters, but then it may also say things like neat, able to read, finger spaces between words, stuff like that. So any skill that children were working on. And then when I was working with a child individually, I could ask them to point out which things they were working on, so that they had a lot of intention going into their writing session. That was a mouthful. So sharing the graphic organizers, that's another thing. You know, that is considered a graphic organizer, for example. But I had a middle schooler that I worked with over the weekend, and I had his parents send me the graphic organizer the teacher was using in advance before the session, and we worked on that writing task during the session. And the kid really didn't know what to do with it, even though I'm certain the teacher had probably told them, right? But basically, you're going to fill out these boxes, and then you're going to put them all together, and that's going to be your paper. And he didn't really get that. He kept saying, I don't know why I have to do this. I just want to write the paper. I'm like, if you write this, you will write the paper. So being really intentional about teaching kids how to use graphic organizers, I found, is really helpful. And then last, I just want to point out this one kiddo. This was a middle schooler who was working on remediation. And it's hard to see the quality of the middle word, which was gusta. It was a Spanish assignment before we did it. But basically, he was working on the magic C letters. So it had G and A in it, letters that start with the C and go up and back down. And so I had him just trace the ones he had already made that were really difficult to read. And he said after, I wish I should have taken before and after pictures, but he said, yeah, that's a lot easier for my teacher to read. She'll be glad that I did that. And you can see the words next to it, not so much, but it was in essence not to overwhelm him and just get some repetition in with the letters we were working on. Some more practical classroom solutions and accommodations are things like the checklist that we spoke about. Here's a good one that I love. Also, kids may voice to text. I've had kids, may go out in the hallway and voice to text, and they get their little Chromebooks out and go ahead and do that, and then they just have to go back through and make some edits. And that can be really helpful for a time-sensitive task that they're trying to get done at school, although I really love kids to write as much as possible, obviously. Layering on visual cues. You can see this person here. If they were left to their own doing their workbook task, they were starting their first line of Y coming down and not the small diagonal short line that you can see they were supposed to make. So I added the green for them so they could then trace it. And even with the green, at first, wanted to come straight down, it took a minute to come up with a new motor plan. That was that impulse control and attention to the detail. I added these green lines, and then boom. You can see this one's really beautiful, and that one was on its way too. So this child, this was after we were mostly remediated. All the letters, the alphabet was technically remediated, but we were still struggling a lot with punctuation and finger spacing and spelling and things like that. So the kid would come up and ask, I'm about to write this word, how do you spell it? And a lot of schools will use best guess spelling, which I really like. It allows kids to just get it out. But for kids that struggle with dysgraphia, it's good to go ahead and start teaching intentionally proper spelling as soon as you can. One thing I recommend is printing out a commonly misspelled spelling list by age. You can say commonly misspelled words for second grade, first grade, whatever, and just start wherever you feel like you need to start, and keep working your way up from there, having kids write those words, copy those words, or maybe you write them for them to trace, especially in the summer when we're not having other spelling words too. That's a really great time to do that. But this child was starting to get in the habit of, this word's in this sentence, how do I spell it? So they could then copy it. And then There's another letter checklist. It's, a little abbreviated from the one we saw. And finally, from the Spelling Without Tears workbook that the child already had, I asked the teacher, in advance, could they make copies of it, and so the child could trace a ton and get more than just the one go at practicing that worksheet page. So that it had all the letter sequencing of it, of a specific kind. I think it was frog jumps or capitals at the top. And you can see I added some lines for, had different colors and stuff, reminding the child which ones were magic C's and which ones started at the top and dove down, stuff like that. So you want to layer on visual cues any chance you get. So the overarching themes in dysgraphia interventions. Attention-based skills are addressed, and it's a wonderful way to do it. And you have to kind of notice that that's probably a problem. ADHD and dyslexia, as I said, are two diagnostic areas where we see dysgraphia coexist often, and it can be alone. It can be a learning difference that a child has on its own, but usually there are some attention-based skills that need to be developed. The growth versus the fixed mindset, we want to just keep reminding these kids when they say something that's fixed, like, this is hard for me, or I can't do this, we want to remind them, yes, you can, you've got this, you're growing, you're learning, you're doing great, and that positive tone always. Scripting, we want to constantly be giving them cues and reminders and things they can think about when they're trying to do something to help interrupt their automatic thoughts and their automatic ways and build new habits. Executive functions are going to be tackled, that impulse control, but I like to point it out to kids. Oh, I can see that you're stopping and your wheels are turning. I love that. I want them to know that I value them taking that time instead of feeling rushed. But I really want to be intentional about telling them these things. It kind of gives them freedom to know what they can or can't do, what they should do, and what we like to see. Reinforced and supported practice is huge. If I keep having a child practice in a way that is incorrect, they're going to build poor habits. But if I can support it, that may mean that I need to go backwards a little bit in terms of copying and tracing and stuff like that for a child who we might think, gosh, we really don't want them copying right now. They should be originating. But if they're not, it's not what they should be doing. I like to offer that everyone have a should-ectomy. And don't say should, but rather, if they're not doing it, what else can I do to get them there eventually? Maybe not today. So that's where that reinforced and supported practice comes in. It builds confidence and allows the child to get in the good habits. And then before you know it, they'll start engaging and taking over more and more, and you'll do less and less. Play and current work are great things to use as treatment modalities because we don't want to double up and pile on work to a school-age kid who's in school. It's just super hard for them. And I will say that kids typically are really excited when I come to the classroom or when they come to see me or when it's time for our Zoom calls and whatever else kind of calls we're doing right now. And they'll say, Miss Shelley, I have this project due, or Miss Shelley, I have this book report, or whatever. And they come ready because they know I'm going to help them with the task they already have to do, and I'm going to break it down for them in a way where they can do all of it. So they might dictate to me what they want to say. I will write it really neatly, send mom a picture, she prints it out, and then they trace it or they copy it. I mean, we can work together with families on the other end. Those parents have been fantastic cameramen, and sometimes they'll set it up and walk away depending on what we're doing or whatever, but a lot of times I can send things in advance or we can work a little bit and I'll say, okay, let's pause. I want you to send me a picture of what you just wrote out if I can't see it clearly because the video quality is poor. I mean, you just kind of have to roll with the punches in these virtual times, but it really is great. There's a lot of pros that I'm going to miss when things go back to life as usual, but collaboration is the other overarching theme, and it's huge because the more the child can practice this at home, at school, and in the clinic or wherever you're doing your services right now, it's really huge. And I like to send a weekly email when I see students in the classroom. Every time I see them, I send out a little email. It might hit the highlights of our session in terms of language we used. I will ask for insight from teachers. Usually I get it when I arrive anyway, so I can go ahead and include that. Teacher says this has been going on, so we're trying to do this to to work on that. This is what we decided to do. So when they're doing their homework this week, mom and dad, you can do it this way. So everybody's on board. Everybody's on the same page. And the compliment reassurance sandwich goes along with that positive tone and growth versus fixed. We just want to compliment these kids for their effort. We want to notice little progress. Kids a lot of times will say to me, I still don't have great handwriting or whatever, but I'll say, well, you want to see the first day you saw me, and I'll pull that out and show them their progress. It's really hard as humans not to compare ourselves to where we want to be or where someone else is. But I really try to help remind kids and their parents and teachers constantly, okay, we're not there yet. They're still requiring so much help, but less help than before, right? So just notice those things, notice growth, and speak really positively about it. The compliment sandwiches, I compliment and reassure you. I give you your feedback. Okay, we still need to work on this letter. Here's how we're going to do it. But man, am I so proud of the progress you've made. And when possible, show them. They love that. I actually had one kid every week I came, can you bring my last one? My paper from last week? He really wanted to see those changes in real time. And then reframe the work as help. You want to reframe the fact that I am here to help you. This is not more work. I am help. And that's why I like to do their schoolwork with them too, because it does make them feel supported, and they typically need that extra one-to-one. Teachers are usually thrilled about it. And in fact, when I'm seeing kids on site, I will say, when's your literacy time, your writing time, your handwriting lesson? And teachers will love for me to show up during that time because they're teaching a whole classroom, and I can pull the child for their work to be done in a one-to-one supported setting. So that is handwriting remediation targeted at dysgraphia in a nutshell. And some sources are here at the end for some of the pictures that I had. And this is how you get in touch with me. If you have any questions, it was really hard not to be able to field those questions in real time as a speaker. I missed that today. But I will say that please don't hesitate to email me. It's swhite@square1md.com. And square one, all spelled out, all one word, MD, like medical doctor, though I'm not a medical doctor. That's just our domain in my practice. And that my office number is there too. So you can leave me a message. I am happy to be a resource. Anyone who knows me knows that I love helping kids. It truly is my passion. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And I hope you learned something today. It was wonderful to be with you. And we will send out a link to this webinar in a few days. Thank you so much.